Let's talk some ball. Let's talk some draft with our friend Albert Breer, who pens the MMQB every single Monday and must-read material for Sports Illustrated back here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you, Albert Breer?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Rich?
I'm great. Let's start first up, before we get to Justin Fields, about Trevor Lawrence and the Sports Illustrated feature on him. Great stuff, great writing, great material.
Yeah, Mike did an awesome job on that, absolutely.
No question. I could not help, though, but think, like, what if Josh Rosen said what Trevor Lawrence said, or his father, or his coach? And what if somebody from Justin Fields' camp or Justin Fields said something like, that it's unhealthy to have a chip on your shoulder, or Justin Fields' high school coach said, you know what? If he walked away from it right now, he doesn't need football. Like, it really struck me, as in that regard. Albert, maybe and I'm not normally a glass half empty type guy.
Yeah, and it's a fair question. And I would say, like if I was another player, like I'd probably be wondering that. If I'm another quarterback in the draft, I'd probably be wondering that. But I also think it's indicative of how unique Trevor's experience has been. And here's what I mean by that. Can you think of another player who's as smoothly gone from star high school player to number one recruit in the country to star college player, champion at both levels, state champion in high school, national champion in college, to number one overall pick?
Well,
like, I don't.
If you remove the word, if you remove the word smooth from it, I'd say Jameis Winston, who hardly lost.
But was he number one high school quarterback in the country?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. No. I mean, even like Andrew Luck, and we think of Andrew Luck in that category, right?
Uh-huh.
But I mean, if you look it up, I mean, he was still like 70th or 80th in the country, like, which is outstanding, as far as how many kids play. But I mean, it's not number one. The only thing I could compare it to is maybe Peyton Manning, right? Like that he was that sort of recruit coming out of high school and, was number one overall pick in the NFL draft. I guess that would be the one person you could compare it to. And I have no idea on John Elway. I don't think recruiting rankings existed back then. My point is, though, Rich, it's just who he is. You know what I mean? I mean, he's had a fairly smooth ride. And it's not to say there haven't been bumps along the way, but, I mean, this is a kid who's always been able to sort of create his own motivation, and his own motivation has been to be the best. And it's worked out for him at every turn. And he's won championships at every level, and he's been the best player at every level. And so, I just think it's maybe a product of how unique this kid's experience has been, even to a guy like an Andrew Luck or a Jameis Winston, the two examples we came up with there. Like, even with those guys, those guys could probably still look up, in their high school class and say, they'd have their own Brady Six, right? There are 6 guys in my high school class that were ranked ahead of me. He never had that, right? So I just think that it's sort of a product of what Trevor Lawrence's experience has been, which very few people can relate to, because his experience has been, it's just such a unique experience.
That was my first initial reaction to this piece and these quotes yesterday. What I just sort of set our question in this conversation up with was an overnight sort of what if somebody else had said this sort of thing? And, and how that would be viewed as a red flag, or not into football, or not completely ready to compete and things of that nature.
Yep.
But my first initial reaction was, well, I mean, kids hardly ever lost, so why do you have a shoulder chip if somebody's not ever looked at the scoreboard and said, I'm better than you, right? Very often.
Right.
And now that I'm talking to you also in particular, it's interesting. He's got a coach. His next head coach is going to be somebody who's not used to losing either. And I'm wondering if, the two of them, how's that going to work when both of them, Urban Meyer and Trevor Lawrence combined, have such, I don't think they lost more than, together. I don't think their losses even reached double digits, maybe combined. It's maybe scratching it. What's going to happen by week 8 in Jacksonville?
I know. And in an environment let's be real here, Rich, 7-9 would be a win, right? 7-9, going 7-9, that's a 6-game improvement. You might be the most improved team in the league and have a losing record, right? So, that's the thing about it is, and I look, that was the main question with Urban, right? Was that every loss, is it Florida and Ohio State, the way every loss crushed him and affected him. That was a big question with Urban. Like when he comes to the pros and, 12-4, 11-5 is an outstanding year. How are you going to handle the weeks where things didn't go your way?
Right.
And I think Urban's aware too that like, it's a different deal, like in college, one loss can literally, if you're at a place like Florida or Ohio State, it literally can feel like your season's over after a single loss. So, I think it's going to be interesting to see how they handle it. And I think it's a fair question to ask, like a kid who hasn't had a ton of adversity and like that's through no fault of his own either. I don't want to make this sound like it's like a shot at him, but he really hasn't had a ton of adversity. And then you got a coach who hasn't lost a lot, but didn't handle losing great when he did lose. It's going to be fascinating to see because again, and I can't emphasize this enough, like 7-9, I think in most people's worlds for the Jaguars this year would be a roaring success.
Yeah, it's +6. That's +6 in the win column. And so, obviously your ears burn. You talk to so many people in the league. What is the general sense before we move on to the draft of what scouts, coaches, front office executives think of how Urban Meyer is going to fare in the NFL? What's the general sense?
I think the general sense is like a lot of it's going to depend on the infrastructure around him. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's from these guys' own experience. You know what I mean? Like it's a big job being a head coach in the NFL. It's especially a big job when you've got some say-so over personnel, which Urban's going to have in Jacksonville. And so, like, I think a lot of it, is going to boil down to how he delegates and the people that he's hired, and so it's going to be guys like Joe Cullen on defense and Brian Schottenheimer and Darrell Bevel on offense, his general manager, Trent Baalke, because I think there is a feeling that, like, just from a culture standpoint and a program building standpoint, Urban has that. Like, that won't be an issue. The issue could be if, you're going to be hard charging the way you were in college and you're not giving players results. That's where it can be problematic. And so to get those results in the NFL, generally you have to have really good infrastructure around you. And so I think a lot of NFL people look at it and say, if Urban staff's right around him, like he could be a really good NFL coach. But a lot of it's going to boil down to how good a job he did. And let's be like, I don't want to sit here and start assigning blame before anything's happened on anybody else. Of course. If Urban doesn't make it, because that's on him. Like, it's his responsibility to have hired the right coaches around him. But I think there is that feeling that, Urban's program, which has been successful everywhere he's been, in his way, can be successful in the NFL, but it's still only going to go as far as the results take him, because getting buy-in from NFL players is all based on results, wins, and giving guys an ability to get rich. And getting those results is going to ride, not just on Urban, but a lot of people around.
Yeah, some of the NFL people I spoke to certainly took note of Urban's statement on free agency, where he wasn't able to interview so significantly somebody's ability to work in his or the team's culture he's about to create. That, there's no home visits, you know what I mean? Like, that's as close to recruiting, obviously, you can get in the NFL as free agency. And his comments about
what he's always sold, Rich, if you think about it, right? Like, what he's always been able to sell, you can't sell it the same way in the NFL. And that's part of the learning curve for him, right?
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show from Sports Illustrated and the MMQB. What is going on with Justin Fields? Where did the second pro day come from? Why was it born out of? I ask you a bunch of questions and you can go for it.
Yeah.
Was it born out of Dan Orlovsky's comments, specifically somebody with the ESPN platform talking about his work ethic, the 49ers trading up to number 3, they'll show at Ohio State, and for Justin Fields, they'll show the Niners exactly what he can do in their system. Walk me through everything going on with Justin Fields.
No, it was born on the Niners trade. That's what I think it was born on. I my feeling is that this happened, and this came together, and it's not just for Justin, but it's for Trey Lance too on Monday. That part of the reason the Niners made the move that they made, and I think they're being earnest, and I'd heard this before they came out and said it. They're being earnest when they say the decision hasn't been finalized yet. They wanted a chance to see these guys live. They wanted a chance to Zoom with these guys. They wanted a chance to dig around these guys without having to sneak around to do it. You know what I mean? Like, and if you had waited until like 3 days before the draft to pull off this trade, you're probably trying to hide all of your intentions, and they didn't want to do it that way. And so a big part of that is going and seeing these guys throw live. And, I think the chance to get the chance to see each of these guys throw live was important to the Niners. So they have the third pick. It's a great situation for whatever quarterback gets plugged in there. So, it would behoove the quarterbacks to give the Niners a chance to see them. And I think what's really interesting about it, I can give you this little nugget.
Please.
So the guy holding the script at Ohio State, the last pro day was John Beck, who I know you're familiar with, who's been the throwing coach for Zach Wilson and for Justin Fields through this process, works with Tom House down in Orange County. The guy holding the script this time around was Corey Dennis, who's the Ohio State quarterbacks coach. And like my understanding is that script was put together with a lot of influence from NFL coaches and having talked to NFL coaches and a lot of influence from Kyle Shanahan in particular. And there were West Coast and quick game elements baked into the script that to those who were there looked a whole lot like what the Niners do. So I think, for the Niners, this wasn't a private workout, but I mean, to some degree, those aren't allowed this year, but to some degree, it had the effect of a private workout because they were getting to see a lot of the things that they would want to see if they had a quarterback in that setting.
Did they take requests like,
like a jukebox?
Yeah, like a DJ. You got any requests, Kyle? You got anything on the route tree you want to see? Like,
I'm not sure if they took requests, but I do think one thing that was that's sort of interesting that Justin did do. So I think there were some NCAA rules about like who can go run routes for him. So last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever the first pro day was, they had Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson running the routes for Justin.
Uh-huh.
And for one reason or another, by rule, those guys couldn't do it again. It's NCAA draft rules, whatever it is. So they had to do it with new guys this time around. So Justin was throwing to two freshmen this time. It's Jackson Smith-Njigba and Julian Fleming were the two kids.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding is, like, Justin was, like, as the workout was going on, coaching these guys up on routes.
I love it.
And how to run this route and how to run that route. And that was interesting to me, too, just because if you look at Kyle Shanahan's background, it's in receivers. He was a receiver at Texas, right? And so I think getting to see Justin's intricate knowledge of the way that the receiver should run routes, the way he wanted them to run routes, where Justin's head is with all of these questions that have come up on him, I think it's just sort of an interesting detail and maybe something that Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch can take away from the experience.
Well, also, too, Albert Breer, is that if there are questions about Justin Fields' accountability, as well as, for himself, as well as towards the team, seeing something like that has got to be a plus.
Yeah.
What is let's drill down deep. Like, what is the true evaluation of Justin Fields on this front, since that has been quite a bit based on a couple of comments from the ESPN family of evaluators and information folk. What is the deal with Justin Fields?
So, I mean, like, first of all, I really like Dan Orlovsky. I think he's a great dude and he does a great job. So I think assigning blame here is tough. And I think kind of what Dan was getting at. Those questions did exist. I'd say at least a month or two ago. And I got them. And probably got them in the same manner that maybe Dan got them. I don't think work ethic's ever been a question with Justin. Where I do think the question is going into him making the transition from being a collegian to being a pro is how he's going to allocate his hours. And Justin, if you look at him, you can see he works in the weight room, right? Like that's never been a problem. And the field work, like I've heard from guys in that program that, you could come in at 7 a.m. and there's Justin throwing to Olave and Wilson, getting extra work in. Like, so I think the thing with Justin's going to be, like, how does he allocate his hours as a pro? and reallocating some of those hours into the classroom to get better in that area. Because honestly, if you look at the flaws and like the couple bumps that he had at Ohio State, and I think sometimes we overplay those a little bit, but a lot of them related to him playing hero ball a little bit too much because he's always been so physically dominant that he could. Like, he would always kind of lean back on his physical ability and be able to pull his team out of tough spots that way. And so I think for Justin, it's going to be, how do I allocate my hours as a pro? And I think he played in I know he played in a pro-style offense at Ohio State. It's just going to be about making progress in that area and maybe putting more hours in the classroom. And not that you have to take away from anything else because you're going to have more time as a pro than you had as a college player, but just being smart about the way that you do that.
And do you really think, I mean, I know that I've asked everybody this, so I'll ask you this too, and pardon me if I've already asked you. I asked it of Sean McVay last hour by saying, I know it's not your house, it's, as a matter of fact, somebody else's house, but he knows Shanahan personally, and he competes with him, and he also knows what it's like to evaluate at the quarterback position and be aggressive to get the one that you want. So I thought he was a perfect guy to ask. Really? They don't know who it is? Like, they actually struck this deal by saying, we're fine with all three. As a matter of fact, let's keep grinding tape, and it's better to be in the position if we have a choice of all three. I mean, like, for real? They don't know who it is? Albert?
Yeah, I honestly, I think that at least a week or two ago, there was a point where if you ask different people in that building, you might get a different answer on who the guy should be.
But they might not know. They might not know in terms of being in that building.
Yeah, and I think Kyle's the fact is, like, Kyle's the one who's going to be pulling the trigger on this, right? So really, I think this would be my guess, and I don't want to like play this off as like being inside information, but sure. I've covered the league for 15 years. I know how a lot of these teams operate and everything else, and I think that, like, for Kyle, it's going to be a matter of, I have what I thought at first, and I'm going to go through the process, and I think his dad could be involved in this too. And at the end, we're going to figure out who the best quarterback is, and I'm going to take all the input, distill it, and figure out what I want to do. I also believe this, and I've been told this a few times by a few different people. They believe that there are 5 first-round quarterbacks in this year's class. Huh. So, for better or worse, the 3 quarterbacks that are going to be in there, like, they went into that trade thinking each of those guys was a first-round quarterback. So, and it's interesting, too, because you bring up Sean, and in a certain way, isn't it almost like Sean just traded Mac Jones for Justin Fields or Trey Lance?
What do you mean by that?
The guy who's like the kind of smart game manager type for the physically gifted, like part of moving. Like, if you look at like Sean, right? And Sean and Kyle are different.
Yes.
And obviously Sean and Kyle are very close. But in a certain way, like, Sean got fed up with the Mac Jones, so he went and got himself a Trey Lance or Justin Fields. Don't you think that's fair?
Well, he definitely soured on the guy who was there. He wouldn't use the phrase of souring. He mentioned production. He also was typical of McVay, Albert. He took responsibility of something that he did wrong that led to the relationship with he and Goff no longer being tenable when somebody of Stafford's capabilities and abilities and still major upside becomes available. That's the way that he portrayed the end of that relationship. But he also did say that he believes that the Niners have absolutely identified one in particular while grinding tape just to be sure. Like, he believes that.
Yeah, and again, like, I think that that's fair, and I think that it's like, look, like I said, like, you hire Kyle because, in large part, he's great on offense and great with quarterbacks, right? That's why you hire him, and you trust that guy to make that decision. Like, that's that. And so there's one guy making this. I think there's one guy who's going to have the trigger at the end, and it's Kyle. And it should be that way. And that's nothing against anybody else in the building. I just think it's, like I said, like, I think, what you're talking about, and what Sean said there is probably right, is that Sean, that Kyle's got it in his head, like, it had it in his head when he made the trade of who the guy's going to be. And now, he and the rest of the team are working through the process to either confirm that or decide player A or player B rather than player C is what's best for us long term.
Okay, I know I could tell you're being father of the year while also providing us great information. So I do have one last thing to ask you, if you're okay with that, is because Albert Breer, we keep mentioning Kyle as in Shanahan. The other Kyle involved in this draft at the top is Pitts. And what is the scoop with what you're hearing with him? Because in my mind, that is the guy who might make the Falcons say, yeah, we're not going to choose one of these first-round quarterbacks now. We're gonna stick Kyle Pitts with Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley for Matt Ryan's final window of significant opportunity here. Or trade out because somebody else has fallen so head over heels for Kyle Pitts at 4. What do you think is going on with him in the draft here?
Here's what I would say. I think Kyle, like the way people talk about Kyle Pitts, the way NFL teams talk about Kyle Pitts is a lot like I remember teams talking about Quentin Nelson 3 years ago. Now, it sounds weird because a guard versus a tight end, but like there's universal agreement on who this guy is, which is exactly what it was like with Quentin Nelson. And then the question became in Nelson, like, okay, he's a guard. Do we take a guard that high? And, I don't think that the Colts would ever regret what they did. And I think that there are probably a couple teams that picked ahead of the Colts in 2018 that wish they were thinking like the Colts. So I think that's sort of where Pitts is, where he's seen as maybe the best prospect at his position in 15 years, since we're going all the way back to Vernon Davis. And then the question becomes how much you value the tight end, how much you might be getting out of the tight end within what your offense is. And everybody's got to answer that. And for the Falcons, it's going to be about timelines, right? Like if you draft Pitts or trade down, well, then what are you doing? You're shortening your timeline because you're going forward with Matt Ryan and throwing Pitts into an offense with Julio and with Ridley. And I mean, they've got some good top end talent there. They need to fill out the bottom of the roster, and they've got depth issues, but they've got some players there. If you wind up taking Pitts, you're shortening your timeline. If you wind up taking a quarterback, you're extending your timeline. And I will give you this nugget to leave you with on that.
Yes, sir.
Terry Fontenot, their new general manager, I can tell you he has gone out of his way to build a relationship with Matt Ryan. He showed up at a couple events where Matt Ryan was at. And on top of that, they've restructured Matt Ryan, which makes it difficult not just to separate from him now, it would make it difficult for them to separate from him a year from now. And so a lot of their actions they aren't the actions of a team that's separating, that's really looking to divorce its quarterback of the last 13 years. Now, maybe a quarterback they love falls to them at 4 and they say we have to do this, but there's been a lot of signs that relationship building with Matt Ryan's been important for Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith. And that tells me that they're at least considering the idea of going forward with Matt Ryan in the short term and trying to win now and worrying about getting your quarterback of the future maybe 2 or 3 years down the line.
Albert, you're the man. Enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend. Let's chat before the draft. Thanks for the call.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich.
That's Albert Breer, at Albert Breer. On Twitter, I follow him. You should as well. He just said something that echoed the comments of somebody earlier this week involving the NFL draft. We're hearing a theme. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.